Welcome to this beautiful tutorial. Today we're going to talk about API routes in the latest version of Next.js. We're going to talk about key concepts such as get, post, put, and delete. We are going to see how do we connect Next.js to our Prisma, and also how do we ensure that we have an efficient communication between our Prisma to our database. We're going to understand the terminologies that are used when you're talking about database connection, how to actually push the schema to our database. Most importantly, you're going to see how to create API routes for your project. That means we're going to cover everything related to API routes. We're going to do actually this in a very simple manner. We're also going to understand the status value in API server response. How do we set this status and what do they actually mean when you're talking about an efficient server communication? And let us dive in. Welcome to the first part of our tutorial. We'll start by creating up a Next.js project. You can create a folder inside your desktop and you can name it, give it a beautiful name like CRUD. Great. Then drag and drop inside your Visual Studio. Then click on these three dots, then terminal. Inside your terminal, you can paste this command. You need to type npx create-next app at latest. This will install the latest version of Next.js. At the moment, the latest version of Next.js is version 15.2.2. Great. You also need to ensure that you select TypeScript. We'll also be using TurboPack, so you can select that as yes. After you finish that, you will see this success message here. That means your project has been created successfully. We'll be using MySQL for our database. Let us go and create a connection to MySQL. Great. Inside your browser, you can search for Avon. We'll be using Avon for our database. Click on Avon. If you do not have an account, you can click here, get started for free. Great. After signing up to Avon, you will see something like this. How do you plan to use Avon? We're going to select personal. You can click on personal. All right. After filling that, you need to provide your name of your application, your country, and then you can click done. Great. After doing that, we need to create a service. Avon has a lot of services, but at the moment we are interested with MySQL. So click on MySQL. The next thing is you have to ensure that you select the free plan. In the free plan, we'll have a 5 GB free of storage. This is what we have inside a free plan. We have 1 GB RAM, 1 CPU, and of course the 5 GB. We're also going to have backups. Great. The next thing, you can just also provide a name here, but you can just leave it as it is. Ensure that $0 is selected, then click here, create free service. Great. After doing that, you will see that we have a service URL. You can click here to reveal. You can also click here and copy it. Great. Let us move back inside our project and initialize Prisma. Prisma is an object relational mapping tool that enables us not to write raw SQL commands. Great. Let us first install it so that we can understand it more. To install it, just type npm install prisma -d. -d is in capital letters, then you can just press enter. I'm going to enlarge this and also move this one up. Great. The next step, after running npm install prisma -d, we need to initialize Prisma. So you can do this npx prisma init. After initializing Prisma, you should see something like this. Great. We now need to provide a database URL and the provider inside of our database. So you can just move inside this Prisma. You can see that a folder named Prisma has been created. Inside it, we have a folder named schema.prisma. Great. Let us navigate inside our schema.prisma. You can actually see something here. We have a database source. We are not using Postgres, so ensure that you change to MySQL since that is the service that we have created. Great. Inside here, we need to paste not actually inside here. We need to move inside .env, and then inside this part, we need to copy and paste the database URL that we have created from the service. This database URL is the one I'm talking here about. So you can just click here to reveal, then you can copy this, then move inside your .env, then we want to paste it here. So you can highlight this part and Control V. Great. We have provided the URL for our database. Let us move inside our schema.prisma. We're going to create a model that we'll work with. This model will enable us to perform read, update, and delete operation. Great. I'm going to create a model. So you can say model, and the name of the model is user. So you can do user like this. Ensure that it is in capital. You are starting with capital letters. A user is going to have an ID. You can see we have some suggestion here. So I'm going to accept this, but we do not have a post. So a user has an ID, which is an integer. Great. And we have an auto increment. We do not want an auto increment. We want something unique. So you can change it from UUID. So I'm going to delete this part. We're also going to change the type of an ID, not from an integer, but from a string. Great. So we have an ID, which is a string. Ensure the string starts with capital letters. Great. And we have an @ID. Then inside here, we can just do @UUID like this. In this manner, we're going to get a unique ID. For example, something like this. Great. But if you're using an integer that auto increments, we're going to get the first ID as 1, the second ID as 3, 2, and then 3, 4, and so forth. But we don't want something like this. An ID like this is not even safe. Great. A user is also going to have a password. So inside here, we can just do a password, which is going to be a string. So you can delete this part. So we're having a password. And finally, we're also going to have a timestamp. This timestamp is going to show the period that the user was created. So we can do a timestamp, which is also going to be a string. Actually, not a string. A timestamp, its value is actually date time. So we can say date time. The next thing we have to do is to provide the default. So we can say at default, it's going to take the exact time. So you can just do now. So this is going to take the exact time that the user was created. You can also see that we have an attribute here of unique. When you say something is unique, that means the name cannot be shared. For example, if you're having a user with the name of Dan, there can't be any other user whose name is Dan. So this part of unique, you can just remove this part. Great. We don't want the username to be unique. Great. There's also something else that you need to know. What about if something is optional? For example, if username is optional, what can we do? You need to just provide a question mark here. Actually, the question mark should be at the end. So it should be here at the end of a string. So when we say question mark, that means username is going to be optional. But at the moment, I don't want this to be optional. I just want this one to be a must. But it helps us understand that whenever you want something to be optional, you just put a question mark at the end. In MySQL, we define data in terms of tables and rows. So we need to provide the name of this table. So we can just name the table user. Great. So what is the main importance of Prisma? If we are not using Prisma, that means we have to write raw SQL. And this is the equivalent of the model user. For example, we have to do this, create table user, ID, and all this, username, text, email, and all this. So Prisma, what Prisma does is that it does this in the background. Under the hood, it creates all this for us so that it can become easier for us. For example, if I introduce a relationship here with post, then creating raw SQL commands like this will become tedious. And this is the main importance of Prisma. You can do this if it will define for you all the raw SQL schema under the hood. And that means you do not have to define all this schema or even cram all of this. Great. I'm going to delete this. This was just for demonstration purposes. After defining our schema, we need to provide another Prisma command, which is npx prisma generate. This one is used to generate this model that we have created here. So you can just say npx prisma generate, then press enter. Anytime you modify your schema or you do something here, you're creating a new schema or even modifying it, you need to run this command so that Prisma under the hood will generate the schema for you. After generating the Prisma schema, we need to create a file named lib. So you can just move here. We want to create the file in the parent. So you can just do new folder, and then we're going to call it lib. Inside lib, we are going to create a file that will be used to connect to Prisma. So we can call it db.ts. We need to install Prisma client. Prisma client will enable us to connect to our database. So we can just do npx I Prisma at Prisma. I'm going to delete this npm I at Prisma /client. Great. It should be npm, not npx. So I'm going to say npcls. Let me clear the terminal and run the command again. It is npm install at Prisma /client. After installing Prisma client, we need to use it actually in this db.ts, in this file for connecting up to Prisma and our database. So we can just do import, and we're importing Prisma client. Great, and we're importing it from Prisma /client. Great. The next thing we have to do is just declare a variable known as global. So you can just say declare global, and inside it we're going to declare a variable known as Prisma. So we can just say Prisma, and this Prisma is going to be of type Prisma client. So we can just say Prisma client, or it's going to be undefined. We can just do this undefined like that. Great. Finally, we have to connect to our database. So I'm going to comment this connecting to our database. Let us define a variable known as db. So we can just say export constant db, and we are saying this db is going to be global this dot Prisma. So we are checking whether we have a Prisma schema and or a connection with this global this dot Prisma. If we do not have a connection, we need to create a new connection. So we need to pass in Prisma client, new Prisma client. Yes. So we are checking whether we have a Prisma client. If we do not have, then we'll create a new one. Finally, we have to do something. We have to check whether we're in the environment variables or we're in the production. So we check whether we're in production. So you can just do this. If process.env, great, we have a suggestion which is correct. If process.env is not equal to production, then we can just use this global this.prisma. Great. So you just provide this command global this.prisma. So we're saying global this.prisma, and we need to equate this to our db, this connection that we have used here. Great. Whenever we are performing CRUD operation, we'll refer to this as db. This is the same. So you can use anything. You can use the word database or something like this. Great. The next step we have to do is to push our changes to our event database. To do that, we need to just do this. npx prisma db push. npx prisma db push like this, then press enter. Congratulations, we have set up it correctly. So you can see we have our database connection is MySQL. Great. And we are being told that our database connection is now in sync with our Prisma schema. If you've done this, congratulations. Great. The next thing we need to do, Prisma provides a way in which we can visualize our database by using something known as Prisma Studio. We need to install Prisma Studio. One thing you have to do, always remember, is that whenever you install Prisma Studio, you have to shut down your terminal. So if there's something running in the terminal, you need to shut it down. But at the moment, you do not have anything running in the terminal. So I'm going to do this npx. I'm going to do this npx. To open Prisma Studio, you just need to do this npx Prisma Studio. And then it's going to open up Prisma. Then you can press enter. Great, we can see that environment variables have been loaded. Something else that is nice is our schema has been loaded from Prisma client. And the most important thing is that we have been given a URL here. You can notice we have localhost 5555. That means our Prisma Studio is running on this port. So you need to open your browser. When you navigate on this localhost 5555, you will see our preview of our model. Great. At the moment, we only have a user model, and when you click on it, you can see we have the fields that are defined. We have an ID, a username, and an email. And most importantly, we also have all the fields such as password. This is very important and very good because you can preview your database without even having to log into your database provider. Let us run our application. Inside the terminal, you can just type npm run dev. This should run our application. Great, we can see that our application is running on localhost 3000. When you open localhost 3000, you should see the application. This is just an example code that is given to us by Next.js. Great. Let us create API route for reading, updating, and creating a new user. We'll move inside our folder here. So just inside this folder app, and then I'm going to create a new folder and I'm going to name it API. And this is the way we create API inside Next.js, inside this folder. Inside this folder, we're also going to create another file called users. So right click on API, then new folder, then we are calling it users. Great. Inside this folder users, we're going to create a new file and we're going to name it an ID. Not ID byte, but route.ts. So right click, then new file route.ts. After running our application and seeing that it's running on localhost 3000, the next thing is just to create API routes. In Next.js, API routes are created inside the app folder. So inside the app folder, right click and you're going to create a new folder and you're going to name it API. Great. Inside this folder, we're also going to create another nested folder called users. Great. Inside this users folder, we're going to create a route. So a route is called route.ts. So in Next.js, all routes have the same extension, route.ts if you're working with TypeScript and route.js if you're working with TypeScript. Great. Inside route.ts, we need to import next response. So you can just say importing next response because we are going to use this one actually. Then inside it, we're going to create another function. We're going to create another function using the method get. So we'll say export async function get. Ensure that get is in capital letters since this one is a HTTP method. Great. We're also going to map the request. So inside these params, we're going to have request and we are mapping it to request. Inside it, we can just return a new response in JSON format. So it's a new next response in JSON format. And inside it, we can just pass something. We are returning a next response in JSON format. And inside it, we can just pass the message. For instance, I can say message and the value is going to be CRUD API. Great. And we're also going to return a status value. So inside it, we can just provide a status and the status is going to be of 200. Delete this new because we don't need it. So we're just returning a next response, message, CRUD API lesson, and a status of 200. And this is the way we communicate in Next.js. So you just provide a new next response, ensure that you have imported it here above. This is just for testing purposes. And to test this, we are actually going to use Thunder Client. So you can click on Thunder Client here, then move inside collections, click collections here. Let us create a new collection. So on this hamburger menu here, you can just click it and then new collection, and you're going to name it users. Great. Inside this new collection users, let us have a new request. Click on these three dots here, then new request. And you're just going to call it test. This one is just testing the API. Great. Another important thing that you want to do, we need to copy this URL here. So you can copy this URL since our server is running on that URL, then paste it here. Then we need to provide our path. Our path is like this. We are inside the API folder, so it's API /, then we enter inside the users folder, so users. Great. And we are reaching now route.ts, just like that. Then click send. Great job. We can see that we are getting this message. All right, let me zoom it out a bit. We have this message, CRUD API lesson. That means our API route is working correctly. And this is the same way we actually do perform a GET request. And this is also the best way that we are using API routes. Routes are just created using this file structure here. We are following the path, then ensure that it's the right path. Great. Let us go back inside our route.ts. Since we have already tested that it's working correctly, we need to import db. So importing db, and we're importing this from /db. Great. We have to declare a variable known as blogs. So we're going to declare a variable known as not blog but users. And you are saying is equals to await db db.users dot find many. So this is a command that is used to actually find everything in your database. So you can just say dot find many. And also it's not db.users, it is db.user. Great. Then we need just to return these users here. So inside this message, I'm going to delete this part. I'm going to edit this, and then we can just return users. Great. Let us test this. At the moment, we have empty users. So I expect it to return a status of 200, which means it's okay, but an empty list. Great. Let us move inside under client, and we are still in the test folder. Click on it, and then we just need to click send. Perfect. We are getting a status of 200, which is okay. That means our connection to database is great. And we're also getting an empty array here, or empty users. We do not have any user at the moment. And that is how you perform a get method. Ensure that the method selected here is get. Great. Let us go back and also provide an API route of creating a new user. For us to create a new user, we're going to also have a function that is similar to that. So you can say export async function, and this time the function is going to be a post. We are making a post request. Whenever you are pushing something into database, the method is post. Great. We are creating a user based on three things: the username, and to check everything, you can just move inside your schema, prisma.schema, this folder here, and you can see the essentials of a user. The ID will be auto-generated, so we just need three things: username, email, and password. Great. Let us move inside our API, and then we can just do that. Not inside our API, inside our this route here, API route here. Great. So we are going to have constant. Then we need to declare the three variables, which is username. Second one is password. And finally, we have the email. So let me put email in between. So we have email here. Great. And we are getting this from request.json. And we need to have an await here. So we can just do await, since it's going to take some time. All right. As you can see, we do not have a request here. So we have to actually provide a request as an argument. So I'm going to expand this input argument, and you can see we have a suggestion which is correct. So we are mapping request, and instead of using the whole world as request, we are using a shorthand which is just request. Great. The next thing is we have to check whether we have username, email, or password. So we can do this if not username, and say if not username. And also we are checking if we have an email. So we can also say if not email or password. We can just return. We need to return a next response. So we can do this, return a next response of status of 400 and a message missing required fields. Great. As you can see, this suggestion is not correct. Therefore, I'm going to delete this. So we have next response, return next response.json, and we're also going to pass in a value here. So I'm going to pass status, and the value is going to be 400. You want a status of 400 if you do not have a username and email or password. Great. If we have all these fields, then we have to actually create a user. If I'm going to say constant user is equal to await, we're going to say db.user.create. and inside it we're going to pass an array of objects. As you can see, we have a suggestion here. Let me accept this. We're going to pass data, and the data is username, email, and password. After that, we need to return a new response. So we can just do this, return next response .json. Inside it, we're going to have a status and a message. So we can just do this message and say user created. And we're also going to provide a status at the end. So you can just do a status of 201. When you're working with APIs, status is used to provide the value that we had seen here. So when you move back inside the under client, this is the status, a value. So 200, normally 200 and 201 means okay. So anything like 500 or 400, that means there's an error. Great. That is how you decide on whether to use a status of 500 or 200. So whenever you have something here that you know the user has been created successfully, you just need to provide that status. But the best way, instead of providing this message user created, the best way is to actually provide the user itself. So we want to return the user, and this is the format in which the user is going to come out. We are having an ID, username, email, and password. Great. And the status is going to be 201. Perfect. Let us test this API route. We move back inside the client, and then inside test, we are changing our method to post, but the URL still remains the same. Great. Inside the body, I'm not going to pass anything. I'm just going to pass an empty curly braces like this, nothing. So we are expecting to get an error, and with this status that we had provided a status of 400. Great. Let us just see it in action. Great. I'm clicking send, and we should see an error. Perfect. This is working beautifully. The status that we have provided is 400, and we are getting this error, missing required fields. Great. You can change this status. It does not have to be 400, but as I've told you, 400 and something, and 500 is used to indicate an error. So you can even use a status of 500. Great. Let us now provide this field, the required fields of name, email, and password. So you come here inside the body, and then you need to provide the value. So I'm going to drag this one down so that you can see it clearly. We're going to have a field of username in small letters. So we can provide an example of username, for example, John Doe. Great. We're also going to have another property of email. And then the value can be, let's say, johndoe@example.com. The next thing we're going to have is the password. So we can have a password. And as I've told you, it's not good to actually just pass the password like that. We need to actually hash the password, but that one will be actually done in another tutorial. So if you want another tutorial on the same about hashing a password, you will tell me in the comments. Great. Let us give an example of a password of 1234. Great. And then let us just click send and see whether we have an error here. If we do not have an error, we're going to get a status of 201. Great. Let us see. Perfect. This is beautiful. We have an ID. That means a user has been created successfully. We have this unique ID. We also have a username, an email, and the password, and also a timestamp that we provided. This is beautiful. Great. Let us move back inside. We have done two methods. We have actually done a get method and a post method. The next method we have to do is also a get method, but we want to get the individual user using his unique ID. You can add as many users as possible. For example, we can also add another one as Jen, and the email is going to be jendo@example.com. Then you can just click send. You can also have another user as Jen. You can also add another user like James. We want at least to have more users so that when we can work, our work becomes easier. Great. Let us just click send, and you can see we're able to communicate with our API. This is great. Let us move inside our API. We want to create an API for working with ID. For example, if you want to delete a user, you must know the ID of the user. Even if you want to edit the user, you must know the ID of the user. That brings about another concept of dynamic routes in Next.js. Inside here, we have API folder. Inside the user, I'm going to right click on the user and a new folder. I'm going to call it ID. So in Next.js, if you're having a dynamic folder, you call it like this, or you name it like this, ID, using square brackets. Inside it, we can just create a new folder and we're going to name it route.ts, a new file. So route.ts. Great. As always, we are importing next response. So ensure that you import next response from /next server. Great. We need to have another function for getting an individual ID. So we can say export async function get. And the difference between this get function and the other one is that in this function, we are going to have an ID. So we are going to do two things inside the parameters here. We're going to drop this down. We're going to have the requests, and I'm going to map this one to next request or just request. Great. And we're also going to have a user ID. So I'm going to pass in the ID. We can do it as params, for example, params like this, and then we need to map it. In TypeScript, you have to map. So we're going to say params, and then inside it, you can say params.id, or a string. We're going to have a string, an ID, which is of type string. Great. We have the params here, which is of type string. Perfect. Inside it, we are going to have our function. As you can see, we have a suggestion here, but I'm not going to accept this. We have to declare a variable called ID. So we're going to say constant ID is equals to params. We are getting the ID from params. Great. Great. Another thing we have to ensure is that we have to destructure the ID or the params. So ensure that you have these curly braces here, and also inside the ID, you have to destructure it from the params. So you can just do this. Great. And then we need to find a user. So you can say constant user is equal to await db.user.findUnique. So these functions are provided by Prisma itself. So you can say find unique. Great. And inside it, you're going to provide an object. Great. You can see we also have a suggestion. I'm going to accept this. And we want to find whereby we have a matching ID. So here it's not await, so it's just await db.user.findUnique. Great. You can also see that we have a red mark under the db. We need to import db here, just here at the top. We're going to import db. Great. And the errors disappeared. So whatever we are doing here is that we are checking whether we have a user who has a matching ID. Great. The next step is we have to check if the user exists. So we are doing this. If not user, we can use that command. We can return, just return with a response of 404. We're going to return with next response.json. Then inside you can just provide a status of 404. You can also provide a message. Just inside you can provide another object, which is message, and its value can be user not found. Great. So if we do not have a matching user, we are returning with this response. Otherwise, we're going to return with a response of, let's say 2 or 1. Great. Return next response.json. And we're going to return it with a message, not actually a message. We want to return with the user. So we want to return the user, and the next thing we can just return a status. So we can have a status of 200 or 201. Let me just give it a 201. Great. Let us test this API route. I think everything is looking good. If you have a matching user, we return with the user with all his details and a status of 201. Great. Let us move back inside our Another client, still on tests. Then we can just do this. Instead of using these tests, I'm going to create a new request. So user, these three dots here, then new requests. And just call this request get single user. Ensure you don't have spaces. So you can just do that, get single user. Then inside it, you can have, we already have here. So I'm just going to copy the URL since it's the same. And for getting a single user, the URL here is this one, /API/user. The method is get. But there's one thing we have to add. We have to add the ID at the end. How am I going to get the ID? So I'm going back here, and then I'm just going to pick any ID. For example, this one here. Let me copy this ID here so that I can put it there. Great. I'm going to put it at the end here like that. Then I'm going just to click send. And that should return the user if we have a user. Perfect. We have the user here. We have actually fetched a user using his ID. This is great. Let me alter this ID so that let me just alter it. Let me add a D at the end. This time we are not going to get a user. Great. We are getting a message user not found. This is beautiful. That means our API is working correctly and we can actually fetch a user using his or her ID. Great. Another thing that you can do, you do not need that Thunder client for a GET request. You can actually copy this one and just paste inside your browser. Let us do it and see. Let us move back inside this folder, this dynamic folder here, routes. We can also provide some other methods such as deleting a user. For example, we can just do this export async function. It's an asynchronous function, and this time the method is going to be delete. Ensure that delete is in capital letters. Great. And you can just do the same as we did. We come here inside the arguments. Let me drop this one down a bit. We are going to have an ID and params exactly as we did here above. And then we can just check inside here. As you can see, we are not finding the unique user, but let me just do this constant ID. Let me accept this. Then I'm going to delete this part. Instead of deleting, let us just work with it. We are getting constant user. Instead of getting constant user, we can just do this. Await. Instead of find unique, we are going to have delete method. So instead of find unique, you just change this part to delete. Great. And we are deleting whereby we are finding a matching ID. Great. And then after deleting, we can just do this. Return a next response. We can just return a next response.json. We're going to just say user deleted. And we can also provide a status. We can provide a status of 200 or 201. Perfect. Delete request is the shortest one. If you can notice, we're just getting the user from the params, and we are also deleting the user if the user has a matching ID. Let us try and delete the same user. So I'm going to the under client, and I'm going to add another request here, then new requests, and the method is going to delete user. So you can name it delete user, and we're also going to have the same. I'm going to copy this URL here, then paste it here. So at the end, I have added the unique ID that we had. Great. And the method we need to change here to delete method. Just click here on delete, and then we need to click send. Perfect. We are getting this message, user has been deleted. I've just shown you how to delete a user, get a single user. Let us learn how to make changes to a user data. For example, you want to change the password or a username or something like that. Great. So we can just move here back inside this API routes. And then here, we need to provide that method. Let us create another function. We say export async function. It's an asynchronous function. And the method this time is going to be patch. Great. And we're going to also repeat almost the same process. Inside here, we need an ID. So we can say an ID, and we are mapping request to request. Great. Then we have to declare a user. Not actually the user, we need to declare the variables that we're going to change with. For example, we have a username, create, and email, and we're getting this from request.json, and finally password. So you can say await request.json. Changing a user details is almost similar to creating a user details. So we can also check if we do not have those required fields. So you can say if not username or email or even password. Great. We can just return a next response, a status of 400, and we can say instead of invalid data, we can say missing fields. Great. We also need to extract the user. So you can just extract the user here above by saying constant ID. Let's say constant ID is equals to request.params. Not request but params, but just params, since we have already destructured this. Great. So if we have those data, we can just use this command await dbuser.update. You can see I have already a suggestion here, which is alternatively, instead of just returning this user has been updated, let us assign a new user to this variable. So we can say our updated user is equal to this. Great. So I'm using this updated user is equals to this, so that instead of a message user is updated, I want to return the user. So we can just return updated user. Great. Perfect. Let us test this. Let us go back inside our application under client, and I'm going to create a new request here, and I'm going to name it update user. So new request update user. Great. And then inside it, let us just go here for getting a single user, or we can just go back here for testing purposes and change the method to get. Let's get all the users first, since we have reduced some users. Great. We can just pick one of the ID here. And then we need to move inside this folder, and then we are going to use the localhost 3000/API, and finally put a / and an ID that we have just copied. Great. And we have to change the method to delete. Perfect. Then you can just click send. Oh, it's not, the method is not deleting, it's actually a patch. We are making a patch request. Sorry. And then inside the body, let me just provide something that is empty. This one should refuse because we have not provided anything in the body. Let me click send. Perfect. We are getting missing fields. We need to provide the necessary fields. Great. Let me provide the necessary fields and let us test it out. But before I provide the necessary details, let me change this method first to get, so that we can know how the user looks like before changing and also after changing. We can see the name of the user is jane.example.com. Let me provide the necessary details for actually changing it. Let us change the name from Jane to James, or we can even say the name from, instead of James, you can just say code with Daniel. And example can be daniel@example.com, the email, like that. We are not changing the password. Let me just click send. But before I click send, let me change the method to patch, because we are changing the details. So the password should remain the same, but everything else should change. Let me just click send. Perfect. We are getting the result as a positive one. It has changed, the username has changed to code with Daniel. We are having this email, and the password has not changed. You can see the password has remained to be the same. This is good news. Thank you for sticking around. This has been a quick tutorial on CRUD API using Next.js App Router. Ensure that you subscribe and also hit the like button. You can also comment on the titles or topic that you want me to create. For example, hashing password, even authentication. Great. See you in the next one.